I would like to thank our top sponsors, Børge Mo, Mathias Proy, Eivind Josten, Fergus Ryan, for making this show possible. And welcome to the Cave of a Palace. Tonight's guest grew up in Rembrandt's hometown Leiden and developed an interest for the built environment and has studied urban planning at the University of Amsterdam and urbanism at the Delft University of Technology. In 2021, he founded The Aesthetic City, which is a podcast developed to the discussion of how to build a more livable, healthy, and beautiful environment. The channel is also featured on YouTube with educational content, such as the very informative video called Why Is It Beautiful? Ruben Hanssen, welcome to the Cave of a Palace.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm very curious to know some more about your background, how you became interested in urbanism, how you became interested in the aesthetics of urbanism, on the value of making beautiful buildings. Could you tell us something about your background, how you came into this field?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Leiden, or around Leiden, a small town next to it. And I would always cycle to school through the beautiful historical city center of the city of Leiden, which has a beautiful core with beautiful churches, 16th, 17th century houses, canals, all the good things of a beautiful city. And so I was already accustomed to the beauty of these places. And yeah, so that was kind of what I was accustomed to, but I was also always interested in the city itself. So one of my first things I did in primary school was doing a little project on skyscrapers, because we had to, in the library, we had to pick from one of those little booklets meant for children to pick some topic, and I found skyscrapers, and I picked it and did my work on that. And I think that, but also visiting Rotterdam with my father, coming out of the train station and seeing all those tall buildings, really left an impression on me. And for some reason, I was always kind of fascinated by buildings and by the built environment. So that is one thing. But this interest in architecture and in skyscrapers evolved into interesting in architecture. And also led me to an online forum, Skyscraper City Forum, where a lot of enthusiasts would come. I think I was like 12 when I had an account there already, just scrolling to see like all these building upgrades. But I was also, it took some time before I got over that stage of just being like wowed by those tall buildings, and started to kind of see like when I liked projects and when I didn't like projects. So I think that was an interesting stage in my development in trying to learn about aesthetics and getting interested in that. But I think, so eventually I had to choose for a study, like a thing to study after high school. And we saw all the lists, of course, all the things you could do in university. And I didn't really see anything I really liked, but one thing, that was urban planning, because it had something to do with the city, and my idea was, urban planning, maybe that means that I could one day design a beautiful city, like design all the things I was doodling in my books when I was not paying attention. I was always doodling away, and sometimes I would make like sketches of towns. And also one other art project, I kind of designed some sort of a vertical city, something I would now not really be for. But the city was the thing I wanted to do. So I started studying urban planning in Amsterdam, because I wanted to go to Amsterdam, beautiful city, large city, a lot of interesting people there, of course, the bustling city life. And I started studying, and I really liked the first courses because you get this introduction and you learn about Berlage, the big Dutch urban designers who designed Plan Zuid, which is an extension of the city to the south, built in like the 1920s. And so we had to go into the city and we had to study the city and write down what we saw, and kind of really also as like a sociologist, see how people behaved in the city. So that formed like how I also look at the city, like how people behave in the city. Where do people go to? Where don't people go to? And then it's very easy to see a pattern. You see popular areas and you see areas that are not so popular. So also during my study of urbanism or urban planning in Amsterdam, I had to do like my final project in urban planning, and I was also fascinated by places that didn't work at all, by very ugly places. And I chose a place called Nieuwegein, where my aunt had lived, because it's a very modern, completely planned place. It was a very tiny village before they decided that should be the place where they need to build thousands of new homes. But it is a very dystopian place in a way. They used all the modern planning tactics to make it into a town, and it's a very average Dutch city, if you look in the statistics. But nobody would really describe it as a beautiful place. And I found it so weird that I was fascinated by it. Like mostly could I also improve it in some way? In what way could it be improved? Could it one day become more beautiful? So that was the topic of that study. But I was also a bit disappointed with urban planning, because as the years grew on, like the first focus on those beautiful city concepts, like City Beautiful, which was a movement at some point, and also the works of Jane Jacobs and all those subjects about beautiful cities of the past. That was only the introduction, and then it became more like planning and very academic. And I never learned how to, like the topic of beauty in the city. They were never talking about it. So I was like, well, I want to do something more creative. I want to have a place where I can actually do something to work towards a more beautiful city. Because I was already of the opinion that I thought like, well, we haven't been building so many beautiful, interesting new places. So I had to look for like where to do my master's, and then I found first I had to do a minor, and that minor could be done in Delft at the Faculty of Architecture. So that was a very nice opportunity. So I chose to go there, and I really loved going to Delft because it was you have the architecture faculty there, which is in a beautiful old building, but they only moved there after their previous building, which was a big modernist building, had burnt down to the ground. So I came to Delft, and I came in this building which was just completely alive with activity, with students drawing their designs, models everywhere. Like there was this competitive energy. But there was also something that kind of, was like, I also noticed that the focus was still not on like beauty in the way I had it in my mind, but I did like the creative energy. So we had a project, and there something interesting happened. I was with a group, and some of the group members I'm actually still friends with today, but there was something interesting that happened because we were designing or redesigning a little park and the area around the park. We had to think of strategies to make it nicer. And one of my first very naive ideas was to say, well, this park, it had a very like a stark, boring fence around it, like very minimalistic and gray and a bit depressing. And I thought like, what if we put a really nice wrought iron fence around it, and nice lamps and nice, beautiful sculpted benches, just to make the area a bit more, like the Vondelpark in Amsterdam, give it a bit more flair, give it a bit more elegance. And well, the idea was kind of laughed away, but not really laughed away. It was just not seen as was one of the potential options. It was not even in the realm of possibilities. So yeah. So long story short, that was my moment where my co-students, who were already studying architecture, corrected me as kind of a naive someone coming from another study, coming into architecture faculty and wanting to build something beautiful, but directly being corrected for this aim towards beauty, because it was not of our time. It was just, well, the whole thing you always hear. And from that point on, I was kind of undercover and just following the steps. And there was also, that was the first part where after that I started to study urbanism, which was the master. That is in, which leads you to become an urban designer, but on like a university level. And it was a fascinating study, of course, and you learned a lot of things. But again, I was disappointed, because it was again, it was a very academically, that they really tried to make it as academic as possible, this study. But again, it was not focused on building a beautiful city like the way I had imagined it before. Like I still had this image in my mind of what an urban designer was supposed to be and supposed to do. So I kind of grew a bit disinterested with the study. And I decided to graduate in using VR technology, which was just having like a renaissance at that time. And that was actually very interesting, but I found it very, I just kind of missed the point of the study. Like, aren't we trying to make places that are just really nice to be for people, instead of trying to study urban form in kind of a very technical, scientific way, as if it's some sort of a elevated science in an ivory tower? Like, where is the evidence that people actually like what we're doing? And it was very detached from reality in my sense. So that was my studies, and
Could you perhaps elaborate a bit on that? You say that it didn't live up to what you had imagined it to be, and that it was kind of in an ivory tower, what you actually were taught. Do you have any examples both on what you had imagined and what you were taught? I guess that...
Well, first of all, there's very intelligent people in the university. I'm not saying that they're like not capable or something. Just what I was expecting was also studying people like Camilo Sitte, like in retrospect, of course. I now know of these people, and also like the German urban designers from the early 20th or end of the 19th century. I kind of was thinking in urban design in their terms, like how they set out their places, or like studying Haussmann, from Paris. That was what I imagined. I wanted to make kind of like scenic places, places that really look nice, and study like what does how do you create a nice ambience in a place, and how do you create nice sightlines? So like at the end of a street you see a nice tower or something. Those kind of things I hoped to learn, but it was very much, so you have a lot of ways to study urbanism in Delft. One of them is Delta urbanism, which is about solving, in delta areas where there's a lot of rainfall and water coming from rivers, how to solve for water, to make sure you don't have floods and those kind of things. You had urban metabolism. It's like very focused on like how the city processes goods and flows of information, and what kind of processes go on in the city, and what kind of urban form results from it, I guess. Then you had urban form, which is really the study of, it's kind of the design part, but also just the study of what urban form is, and And then you have complex cities, which is complex. A lot of different, like globalization and all those international processes. And politics, design as politics. So you have all these very specific roots in design, and they're all focused on some very academic things where you can write tremendously long papers on. But where is the whole part of just creating attractive places? Where is the part like creating maybe profitable places where profitability for a municipality, but also probably a developer, comes together with health for the citizens and well-being, because you need to make it. It needs to be made for a market. It needs to sell, but it also needs to be popular with the people living there, and it needs also to be healthy for the people living there. Where is the touch point of those study subjects in university? And now I see, like, how could that not been taught? It's so obvious we should teach students that, but it wasn't.
To me, it sounds like the field of urbanism has had the same kind of development as the field of, or the fields within aesthetics in general. That it has become, it has this result from modernism that is not, you do not regard your product as a product, because the ideas behind it is more important. So for instance, and you can trace that back to Plato and everything, that's saying that what is more important is what is behind the motive, for instance, in a painting, or behind if you say a building, more specifically on architecture, today you see modernistic architecture, which is trying to be original or everything, and that hasn't to do with the product itself and how people respond to it, but the idea behind it.
So a meta story, perhaps.
Yeah. So your example with the park, where your suggestion, your naive suggestion, but also the not naive, but I would say a very good suggestion, how to make a park more lively.
Yeah.
And your suggestion was to put iron fences around, and
beautiful wrought iron craftsmanship.
Yeah, and maybe maybe a statue or a fountain or something like that. And that reminds me of the Royal Garden in Oslo, which is I would say it's the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful parks in Oslo. It's very romantic, and with beautiful trees, and not in a structured way, but in the more, it's supposed to look a bit wild. And a few years ago, 5 years ago, it must have been some kind of a modernist urban planner or something who had a project, and it was, I guess the goal was the goal of your task, to make it more livable, enjoyable. And what they ended up with doing was not to place anything that you could objectively say is beautiful and that they have seen is popular or seen is successful in the past or something like that. Not a statue, not an iron fence. They had an idea that was to make sculptures from children's drawings. Yeah. So when they had made some kind of a naive drawing of a you don't know what, because it's just abstract, they made that into a sculpture. Or a rainbow that some children had drawn became a rainbow. And that reminds me of what you said. Maybe.
Yes, I can, I think, go a bit deeper into that. So what I recognize in that is the thinking in concepts, and the selling, the ability to sell your concept, which is very important in architecture schools nowadays, or at least in Delft, because you are trained to develop a concept that has to be unique, it has to be original. Then it needs also to be feasible, so you need to prove it can be done. And then you also need to be able to to sell the concept with nice drawings, with all the deliverables you need to produce. So it's very much like concept and idea based, and also salesmanship based. If you're a great salesman, so to speak, and you're also good enough at drawing and just making and intelligent enough to make it a working concept, then you can actually sell anything and get really high grades, because that's the trick of the trade. And you see it with some architects. They're excellent salesmen, but their work is sometimes questionable. And in architecture, that's actually very much stimulated. But also it separates the urban designer from, or the architect from the person who's using it, because they think of a concept which is their originality, superimpose it on the place, and then expect people to enjoy it. That's not how the world works. I'm suggesting we look at evidence-based design, evidence-based parameters. So, what do studies say on what makes people more, feel safe or feel happy, or use eye tracking studies, and then see what would be optimal in this and this area. So go bottom up and design bottom up instead of top down. So this concept based thinking is, I think, very top down.
And this is a good transition into your podcast, the Aesthetic City. Why did you decide to start up this really great podcast that is so informative, both for people that are within the field, but also people that are completely new? Yeah.
So for that, I will continue my story a little bit, because I left at where I started to study where I finished my study with VR. And for a while I tried a little VR startup, but I didn't feel it worked. So continued to work at an engineering firm, and that was interesting work, and I met nice people there, and it was good for a time. But then the COVID crisis hit. I was at home a lot and working from home, and there was not enough work as well. So I was also reading more and on internet, and then I kind of stumbled upon some accounts and some people who actually showed the alternative, that there was an alternative. I didn't know, I knew that I liked certain types of architecture, and I thought they had very good merits, but I didn't see anyone actively designing it or saying that it was possible. And then I had kind of like a paradigm shift, which really, my thinking changed from it is just something that's out there and it's very vague and it's not happening, to it is an actual workable alternative and we can do this, only not enough people know about it, and not enough people have actually dived into it enough. And then I was looking hey, I want to learn more about this, and I was looking for a podcast. There was no podcast. Well, now I've found some podcasts that are touching on the subject, but not exactly the thing I was looking for. I looked for YouTube channels that would explain me the things I was looking for, and I didn't find the YouTube channels that were specifically targeting or presenting the information in a way that I find interesting. And I had always been doing a lot of video, and I knew something with audio, and also in that time I was very lucky financially to be able to take a sabbatical I'm actually still in, and I thought by myself, 1 + 1 is 2. I have the self-confidence to just start this. It's a nice journey. It's a great challenge to also learn more about it as an educative project for myself. But also I saw if no one else is doing it, I should do it, because who else is going to do it? It could take 5 years before someone gets the idea, and I think it's too important not to happen. So I started the podcast, and I also started the Twitter account, which actually happened first. And that started to grow really rapidly, because I took a lot of pictures and I showed these online and people liked them. So I grew rapidly there. And then I had something to, a little group to to push my podcast to, and so I started with the episodes, and now I have, I think, 23 episodes, and it's a bit slower at the moment, but I'm picking it up again. So it's growth from a sense of urgency and a sense of like there was something lacking, and also perhaps my personal naivety, that I think like, I could take a shot at it and maybe it works. I mean, I did study urban planning and urbanism, and I have an opinion about it, so why not, It's I think it's too important. And then I started meeting more and more people, and you kind of get sucked into a rabbit hole in some way. And then it's just very important to always stay in touch with, reality. But there's so many, it's all good news. There's so many good studies. There's so many promising projects, and it just all adds up. And when you see that, you're like, how could you ever go back? How could you ever not advocate for this?
And you have had some really, really distinguished guests at your podcast, Robert Adam and Mikael Diamant and several others, really, really knowledgeable people.
Yeah.
And I must say, I really personally support that. I really value to lift those people that has knowledge about the theory behind it. I think that's very important to a movement. If we can call it a classical movement that is ongoing now, and parts of it that is very important is the uprise that you can find among people that you see on Facebook groups such as the architecture uprising that is spreading throughout Europe, and which is also starting to spread in the US, I think, and in some other parts. And that's very important to have kind of an engagement among the public. But I think it's crucial to have a strong theoretical foundation, and that is what your podcast is contributing to, because it is a philosophical discussion, it is a theoretical discussion, and it's a discussion that is completely serious. It's not only, oh, that's ugly and that's beautiful, but it's more what is the beautiful, and why is that important, and how can you say that something is ugly? Because as you probably have met so many times, it's easy to be met by modernists with that, well, that's what you think, but it's all subjective. And you can't say what is objective. But if you have those kind of conversations, serious conversations, you can really develop that thought.
100%. And it's also important to make such a thing, good for like a wider audience. So these talks are not too filled with jargon. Of course, there's some jargon here and there, but to make it so that people who just have a slight interest in it can also hear it and get in touch with these people and their theories, because that was what was missing. Like there's a lot of books you can dive into, and you can go into the library and really go deep, but this is also to make it a bit more approachable. But also very important is the hopeful aspect of the story, because there is hope, there are very interesting things happening, and I want to show the world kind of where it is moving, what is happening, and how their work has contributed. So that is very important. So those are some interesting things. And also what I think is important to note is how nice these people are. They're all so friendly. They're so helpful. They're so, positive. Of course, some people have, some negative points about things they don't like. But a lot of them, they just shut themselves off of like the things they don't like and the negativity, and just only focus on the things they can improve. But they're just really nice to talk to and also to handle with. You know, like I've never had like any of them who were rude towards me or unwilling or perhaps busy, but that's the only thing. And that was also for me like a warm bath. You know, you come in contact with these people, and they're willing to help, and they're just really friendly. They're just nice people. They're good people. So that's also a very nice thing to have experienced for myself.
Yeah. And one perspective that I personally think is very interesting. My background is in philosophy, and it's how much potential there is in attempting to define beauty, because you can, if you are curious to know more about goodness, what is morally good. Yeah. All philosophers have written about that since ancient time. And what is truth? Yeah. Everyone has written about it. But when it comes to beauty, it was taken, I think that's the reason, it was taken so much for granted back, especially in ancient times, that you don't see any definition from Aristotle on beauty. And or if you find some definition, it's usually very subtle. Yeah. And it's usually just taken for, you just state it instead of explaining it and delving into it. And then of course some have tried to define it at later age, but it's compared to the others, it's much less dived into than many other aspects. And then suddenly it was removed, especially within aesthetics, as a value. Then it was just talking about an aesthetic experience, and that doesn't have to be beautiful, because that is more sublime, and that could be and sublime from Immanuel Kant's definition doesn't have to be. So it's there's a lot of potential, if we should see the positive side of it, to really define what beauty is, or attempt to define it. Yeah, and there is I'm always a bit more practical in this sense, that I don't go into philosophical debate too much. I'm very much attracted to the neuroaesthetic side, and to the research that is there, and like how people react to different structures, to different forms. So that is my side of it, but it's definitely true. Also, Neer Bourras, I think in his book, The Art of Classic Planning, he also tells about the sublime and beauty, and he states that beauty is derived from positive emotions, and the sublime is actually like derived from negative emotions, like fear, like this hugeness which just impresses you, but also kind of from a primordial fear of huge ravines. And I think that is for me a helpful framework to understand that concept, to think about beauty and fear. But for the rest, I think there is so many deep discussions you can have about beauty, but I think for urban design and architecture, I think it's really helpful to just look at psychology and what neuroscience says, and how people like physically react to things. Do they start to look away? Do they start to sweat perhaps? Does their behavior change? Do they avoid it when they walk around it? Those kinds of studies I think are extremely important to do, and I don't see enough of them. That's very interesting. Do you have any examples, either on your own research or some research that you have read on these neuroaesthetic responses? Well, I know that like Anne Sussman and Nikos Salingaros, two researchers. Nikos Salingaros is a mathematician, also architect, and he is very much writing papers on fractals, and also neuro-related things. And Sussman is doing a lot of eye studies, and she compares in these online surveys with a webcam. It's calibrated. You see like a dot like jumping over the screen, so you focus on it, and then it's calibrated, and then it can actually track your eyes where you look on the screen, and then two pictures are shown on the screen, and then your
when the picture is shown, like your eyes quickly jump over the picture, and then it with the software it's just analyzed with a lot of examples to see like where people look and what people look away from, and then that way they see how people like from they look away from blank surfaces, big glass surfaces. People just don't look at it. If you see a face, people directly look at the face. If they see windows, people look at the high contrast point. So the windows they look automatically at. So that also shows or could show that accentuating windows and doorways is very important. I think it's also said by Erik Norin in the other interview that if you don't see where the door is, it's a failed design. And I think I very much agree with it because that's how people work. You need to register with your eyes, and then so your focus can be driven towards it, and then like, hey, there's a door, and if it's empty, if you avert your eyes, that's also, I think, it says a lot more than only averting your eyes. It says that like we can't process it, we can't do anything with it. So it's in a way it could be seen as alien in a way. But yeah, so those are some of the research, the people I know of. There are more. From the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to like list them, but there's a lot of interesting things in that field, but not enough in my opinion. So what Anne Sussman is doing is important in that respect. Yeah.
So that point with alienation, that I've also read research that shows that especially modernist flat surfaces with almost no visible windows or anything can feel very alienating. And to play the devil's advocate, why is that necessarily something bad?
Yeah,
it could be argued as being some kind of that it's exciting at some points, and we need to have that kind of diversity. That sometimes it's you can keep the old town, but then you come into the more exciting modernistic area, and you feel alienated. But that's part of the experience of being human or something like that.
Well, there is, and then there's also research that shows that stress goes up in these kinds of areas. And I think Nicholas Boy Smith with his Create Streets has done an amazing job of compiling all that research, which shows that all these social factors in how people behave, people behave more fearful in those environments. They behave more suspicious. There's indicators that stress levels go up, health goes down. There is just so much evidence to point towards that those areas, even though they can be seen architecturally as exciting and exhilarating, they're not bodily experienced like people like that, and people actually start to behave differently. And also, who has that opinion? Is it like that opinion of the architecture magazines that say like this is there's some really interesting work here? If you ask the people in the street, do you like this street? Do you like this area? You might get a completely different answer. And sometimes there's also some like cognitive dissonance, or there's some idea like, it's all new, so it should be good, but I actually don't really like it. So this idea like it should be good because it is designed for us, it's done by the experts, but personally I don't like it. And that is a very interesting marker we should start to notice when we do research in cities, and we should do more questionnaires and make whole maps with gradients to see like, do you like the street? And you can just like where people really like the street, you see it dark red, and where it's people actually hate it, it's dark blue, and then start to take conclusions from that.
Yeah, that could drive the city planning and city development into a more user-oriented direction.
Exactly, like car companies do. I mean, other companies do that all the time with all the products. But with cities, for example, it's like, for some reason, it's not happening like that. So we're not seeing people in the city like a customer almost, and that's, of course, I mean, they're civilians, they're inhabitants, but as an inhabitant, you are forced to see all that stuff that's built. So in a way, they're a forced customer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One example of that, relating back to your initial interest in skyscrapers. I remember one time I was in New York City, and I studied in the States, and I took the metro and came up the stairs, and I remember I saw some fantastic columns, Corinthian columns, and I was like, what building is this? It's fantastic, because I saw it like parts of it. It was like, this must be some kind of a temple or something like that. And then at first I just looked at the columns, and then I looked up, and it was actually a skyscraper that they had made into something that is more tolerable for the people on ground. Because I'm not a particular fan of skyscrapers, but if you are building one, then that's the way to build it. It was so beautiful on the first 3 floors or something, and then it became glass above that. But it just shows that that's someone that has actually thought about the impression it makes on the ground level.
Yeah, that's very important, and that's often completely disregarded, the ground level floors. I think in Leiden, my hometown, near the train station, they're building new towers, but on the bottom floor they have like 3 or 4 floors, which are like the podium, and then on top is the tower, to give it kind of to adapt it a little bit to the urban fabric around it. So it's not like just a tower standing in empty space, which is an excellent thing. But then you look at the lower floors, and it's very ugly. So it doesn't respect Leiden as a city at all. And then the tower on top is also absolutely horrendous. But that's just my opinion, of course. But it's not like spires, because towers used to be slender things. Like if you look at cathedrals, of course, they also tower, but they had a significant symbological meaning. But nowadays, of course, well, they're kind of symbols for sometimes for power, but often also just for money. And now it's also for the need to house a lot of people. Although I'm not sure if that's the only way to house people, but towers often used to be just more slender. They used to be like having setbacks. And also that's what we often love about the early skyscrapers of New York and of Chicago, is those slender skyscrapers with all the setbacks. That's what really defines the skyline. And now it just goes up straight, and it's just a block. And it's I think having some sort of setbacks introduces some proportion in the block as well. So that's all aesthetic things. But this picture, for example, shows how important the design on street level is. This is in Rotterdam, and you see just a complete disregard of all the public life on the streets. And it's a horrible, windy, dark place to be. Nobody wants to stay there. Nobody wants to sit down there somewhere to watch city life go by or anything. It's just like you hastily scurry around. And this is like a tower, I believe, from the 90s, but they're still building things that resemble it, completely dead facades. So this is like the opposite way you should design a tower, and this is one of my big critiques for towers often, is that they have all the attention for what is above, but below they often say, yeah, we develop an interesting program for the street level, but then in reality it's just like a flat glass surface. Yeah.
What other pictures are here?
So this is a picture of Paseo Cayala, or Ciudad Cayala, in Guatemala. I took it last December. I was there. I was in the region for marriage, and so I traveled here to see this plan, which was actually this whole area in Guatemala City was master planned by Krier, well, the well-known, more traditional urbanist. And this is the Azaria Pavilion, designed by, I think, Richard Economakis. He won the 2013 Palladio Award for it. And what this place shows is actually kind of the central meeting spot of the city. But why I chose this, why I find it interesting, is it shows so many things that work well for a city. So first of all, you see the people. What do the people do? You see people just walking around, but a lot of them make pictures. Why would you make a picture in a city? Because you like it and you want to be associated with that place. So if you see this behavior, everybody comes here to take their picture. I think it's also because they like the building. It's a beautiful place. They like the Christmas decorations, of course. Some people take it with the decoration, but you also see people taking pictures just on the stairs or just with the front of the building. So it is centrally located, but it's also the architecture. Well, on the first, when you look at it first, you think, oh, that's just a classical building, repressive, classical. But then you start to notice, if you don't like classical architecture, of course, if you really pay attention, you see that the capitals are shaped in the form of maize or of corn cobs.
Yeah.
And that is actually a reference to the local culture, which is Maya. And they survived off maize. That was their staple food. And then the stairs actually refer to the Maya pyramid architecture. So it is a combination of the Spanish influence and the Maya influence, which is distinguishing for Guatemalan culture. So it's a very local thing actually, and people love it. It is a place where you can hold a marriage inside, and so it shows a place also that because of its beauty, it attracts people. It shows the role of a public place. It's the embodiment of a public place, and it's also designed like that. So I think it's to see all the people here it's just proof how it works, and that it works. So that's why I find it a very powerful picture as well. And you see like some food stands around, so you can get something to eat. And it's not only rich people, because there's a lot of critique on Cayala. A lot of people, there were some articles which were written to attack Cayala because they said, it is a closed compound with people with guns standing around it to kind of protect it, and only rich people can enter, which is completely false. It's a lie. It's an actual public place. Everybody can come there, and I've seen whole families of indigenous people. They're quite poor there. Walk around and just to stroll around. Some don't even have the income to eat in the restaurants, because there is indeed some fancy restaurants there and some shops, and they might not be able to go to the Nike store and buy a pair of sneakers there, but they come there all over town to just enjoy their evening, to have a stroll. So that's incredibly powerful. And also, of course, you have some of the residential areas which are guarded by gates, and there's some security walking around there as well. But the point is, it's still Guatemala. Like, it's not that with such a project you can just magically not have any security and expect that there will not be any crime. So of course there's some security, but it feels safe, and that also attracts people, and that is of course a bit of a necessity. But the whole idea that it is some sort of like a nasty place, the people coming there, they certainly disagree. The people from Guatemala, from the city, they love it, because for them it's also kind of a hope for their country. They came from a bloody civil war, and then this is one of the first things that's really kind of Guatemalan, that doesn't look generic. It's actually accustomed to their culture. And then you get all these newspapers and architects writing nasty articles on it to kind of trample that hope they just built, which is incredibly mean as well. So I thought it was a brilliant place to see and to walk through.
That relates much to a fascination that you have mentioned that you have for this collective image
Yes.
that we have of the future.
Yeah.
That's something that interests you, and how what is the idea of progress? What is
Yes.
the idea of the future?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Of
that
course.
interest?
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, it's a very simple question. When you ask yourself, what would the future, the ideal future look like? You often think of yourself sitting in a nice chair, surrounded by your family, in a beautiful house, beautiful environment, in the ideal situation, of course, with perhaps a dog or a cat, and in a nice location, and with community around you. That's like the personal ideal of getting old somewhere, and to hope for the world for your children. A nice, safe world that is nice to live in, and that is reasonably wealthy, healthy, etc. But then if you see what is the collective image of the future, if you ask someone, hey, what do you think the future will look like? Then often they think of all the films they see, they tap into this collective image we see in all these movies, and we read in novels about, which is incredibly dystopian, with like Coruscant from Star Wars, or the city from Blade Runner, with all these mega skyscrapers, everything the same all over the planet, no distinguishment anymore, people living in these living pods, super tiny, crime everywhere, ugly concrete tower blocks reaching into the sky with flying cars. Another variant of that is like the white wavy buildings with all the green, some sort of like a super futuristic world, but also everywhere the same, and that is then their image of what the future will look like. But if you ask people so if you ask people about their personal idea of the future, then that is very different from that collective idea of the future they think. So there is like a contrast there. It doesn't add up. So if you say like, hey, but should we then develop the world into this dystopian world with all these skyscrapers? And they say no, but we're actually doing it right now. So how can we collectively change the narrative? How can we change how we think about the future towards a beautiful future? Like, why can't we have a beautiful vision of the future in which places still have uniqueness, still have their own architectural style, their own heritage, and where we somehow kind of protect the old cities, but also be able to expand in a nice way, that it's actually that doesn't involve building like a wall of skyscrapers around old cities like Amsterdam or Venice, for my part, in the water, whatever, but to build with respect for those places, and so offering an alternative view of the future. And that is my question to see, like, is that possible, and also what would be needed to get to such a change, because it requires to go from pessimistic thinking to optimistic thinking.
What do you think it requires?
I think that a lot of people need to spend a lot of time on these images, and these images need to be also in films. The problem is that negativity sells, and I mean that's why newspapers are always filled with a lot of negative things and not with positive, optimistic things, because those newspapers wouldn't sell. And a lot of people have tried to do such a thing, like the good news newspaper, but it always kind of fails. And the same is for movies. If everything is perfect, there's no story to tell, because it's a happy end, you know. It's kind of a final state. But at least, you know, that there could be more focus on perhaps in the media or in films or in books or in stories on like this battle towards achieving more beauty, and people perhaps even achieving it. So that is one way, but it's a very tough question because I'm not sure if I have the full answer to it.
No,
yeah.
If you had, it would be
yeah.
it would be a spectacular episode.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think just telling people that there is an alternative, opening their eyes for that alternative, is a very important thing.
And also, just the first step is being aware of it. It makes me think of the last 150 years or so. There has been, as you mentioned, so many dystopian films and literature, and not that many utopian, but more dystopian. And many of them also has been about a really, really big pandemic. That there will come some pandemic that will just make the human race be dead and gone.
Zombies
something like that. Either symbolically through zombies or movies that people cannot reproduce anymore, and something like that. And in some ways, I think the pandemic that we have been through has partly been a result of that. It was like, now it's here. Now it's happening. It's happening. And if there had been no literature on, and if it had not been a collective understanding that was an or a threat that was just hanging over you, and it had to come soon, and we're just waiting. It's not a question about if, but when. And
it's in a form. It's conditioning. It's conditioning a population to know that such a thing could happen, and see the way in which what it would look like, because they have seen what it would be like with checkpoints, with people in white hazmat suits. So almost for people to expect it. And I think the same is with this future that's very dystopian. By showing it over and over and over again, it's like to make people expect such a future. And I think there's a lot of people who would not agree with this, but I think it's very logical. Yeah,
and also if you see even it. In literature, it doesn't have to necessarily be that or to rephrase that, sometimes you can see examples that the beautiful is the good guy. For instance, in Lord of the Rings, you see the world of the elves. It's so beautiful. It's really, if you should decide where to live, should you live in the in the offices of the orcs, or should you live, because they look like office buildings, or should you live in the palace of the elves? Of course you would live in the palace of the elves, but there's still something behind there that is it's kind of the old world is the beautiful, while the threat, although it ended up not winning, but it's still the new threat that is coming, and it's so it's really really embedded into the collective image about that dystopian future. That dystopia and future is like they're really, really connected.
But in Lord of the Rings, it's actually a battle against that world.
Yes.
And in other films, it's portrayed as the way it's going to be anyway. It's already an established fact. Like, this is the future. This is where the story starts. So, take it. It's already happened. So I think that also says a lot. Like, if you see the world being threatened to become like that, then there's more like an idea like, hey, you could actually act against it. But if it's already there, then you're kind of already programmed like, well, Allah, it's there already. We don't have any choice.
It's definitely much more optimistic in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But that's also maybe one thing you might talk about later. But the value of actually going for beauty, the reason you would do that, but also the value in that is that it is hard. You know, it's a challenge, but it's worth it. So it's kind of like a worthy cause, you could say. But yeah, it might be very hard. That's the whole problem. Like it is easier to make something ugly than to make something beautiful. And in that difference of that it is that hard versus easy, there's a big challenge. You need to put in extra work, extra discipline, extra skill and training to get to a thing, to an end state that is beautiful. And that is also why the process of embracing beauty is so valuable, because it's kind of an uplifting journey. You need to study a lot. You need to go to a lot of places. You need to practice a lot. And then when you reach that, you can achieve beauty. And now it seems like we're going for cheap thrills. We're looking for shortcuts. And of course, I mean, some people, and then you can even think deeper and like, but isn't the tree beautiful, and isn't it easy to just plant a tree? Well, for us it is, but the tree took millions of years to evolve into what it is now, and then also the tree needs to grow to its full growth, and it takes a lot of time, and for the tree it's not easy. So like, there's also a lot of struggle in nature to become the beautiful thing it is. But yeah, that's maybe a deeper philosophical thought about, yeah, is it hard to build something beautiful, and if not, why so?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question, and I think it's definitely a good point, and it brings us back to what we talked about with the definition of beauty that is really not that much elaborated on among philosophers. So, for instance, the philosopher Roger Scruton is one that is at least known for having written about that and having a documentary about it, but it's not a very it's not that thorough a definition of beauty. It's more I would say talking around it in a way, not to criticize that, because it's a good work that he is doing, but there's still so much potential in defining what it is, and it's an easy trap to go into, to talk just about what is not beautiful. Yeah, that's talking about easy and hard. That's easy, but to actually trying to define it, and when you linked it to nature, to me that's one of the most. It's very simple, but I think it's worth exploring. The architect Vitruvius. Yeah, he mentioned briefly that something like beauty is the patterns. Beauty is found in the patterns of nature. Yeah, and it's a very simple statement, but I think there's very much into that, and you can elaborate very much on that. He didn't do that specifically connected to beauty, but
of course, because nature is. I mean, you see it in so many, also again, the studies, that if you plant trees in the street, for example, it directly has a lot of positive effects on people's health, even on the worth of the homes in the street. But it goes much deeper, just forest bathing, for example. People really almost like heal when they are in nature. So there is something there, but also it's not only it goes back all the way to physics and geometry and math, like the geometry in which we live, which can be described by math, is fascinating if you really start looking deep into it. And then you have the mathematicians who find even the beauty in the math itself, like the Fibonacci numbers and the golden section, all those interesting patterns they find also with fractals. There's so many interesting things if you really dive into it. I believe even that there, I'm not sure if it's a myth or if it's real, that there's more mathematicians, they're on average more religious than other people in other fields of science. Oh. So that's an interesting thing. But then going from that, like the very abstract world of like the fabric of our reality, to like one layer higher, what comes from that layer, like what has come from matter, and that is nature. And what, yeah, so a lot of the beauty of what is in mathematics is also pops up in nature, like in sunflower seeds. You have, I think, the Fibonacci sequence, reflected, and of course all the interesting geometrical patterns, like six-fold geometrical. What is it? Like I just think of like snowflakes, for example, and how all the, you could almost say like some of the Platonic, like the cube grows as some minerals, you know, that all these approximations of geometrical shapes naturally occur in nature, and then they start to together form things we as humans find beautiful. I think that's very interesting, and to just wonder about.
And going back to your point about whether it is a downside or maybe an explanation on of why it's not built more classical, that it's harder to build beautiful. Yeah. I think that or it
maybe initially.
Yeah.
Like
okay. Yeah.
My idea is because there's two sides to it. Maybe it is like that side of beauty is more linked to craftsmanship, to really produce something that is built with a lot of skill. But I think if you have the right ideas on how to make a space pleasant, then you can actually there are, I think, some successful recipes to fairly easily create a place that is pleasant and perhaps even beautiful, and that involves just using these some principles, that's perhaps leading into a thought experiment I have. Yeah. The thought experiment I'm always thinking of is, what if you would take a little square somewhere with a dilapidated shopping mall from the 70s or something, with an ugly building, ugly little square with just the regular floor tiles and the regular ugly functional benches and everything, and you want to make it into a nice place. I think there's some principles you could use to make that place quite nice and quite beautiful, actually. And that would be to just, of course, plant trees. That's very important. Put in cobblestones. Take nicely decorated benches and other street furniture, and maybe place a fountain, because also people love water. And then give a facelift to the building surrounding it. So you use nice proportions and either vernacular or classical architecture, something that has all these, that has more proportion, detail, fractal qualities, biophilic qualities in them. I'm pretty certain that if you would do such a thing to a regular square, you could have a massive effect, and it would instantaneously become kind of a loved place. And it would increase the housing prices, and it would be a very interesting thing for urban planners to use, like a tool in their toolkit. And why this is interesting, because of course it's a thought experiment. I haven't done it, and I'm not sure if it would really be a success, if there would be some unexpected circumstances that would not make it into a very popular place. But I'm pretty certain it would become a nicer and more liked place, and it could boost a lot of things there. But the importance of it is, what if you extrapolate that to other places in the city? If you if you would not only do that with one square, but with all the squares in the city, which are ugly like they were, or do the same to streets, could you perhaps fix cities like that? Could you make cities more attractive so they can actually retain their talent, get more investors perhaps, get people who didn't want to live there again, and then maybe release some of the pressure of the cities that are now more successful, improving by beauty. So that is my thought experiment. But of course, it would be expensive to do because you need a couple of million euros, I think, to do such a thing to a square. But I think it would be a wonderful experiment to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it sounds like something that would be really, really successful, and there. But I'm curious, through your podcast, have you in what way do you sense a change that is coming? Because this thought experiment is something that sounds that at least I would say 10 years ago would sound like just impossible. I would say now it's maybe more like, well, it's a lot of money, but good luck. Maybe it will be possible one time. So it seems like there is a progress. Do you have that kind of experience?
I think so. I mean, there is of course a lot happening. I feel like there's a lot happening online. In the real world, there's also things happening, but I think the most hopeful thing is the architecture uprising, for example, in Scandinavia, which really shows that there's a very big bipartisan support for this. Not only one select political group, but actually they have discovered so many people want this, that a lot of political parties there have joined, actually, have adopted traditional architecture and urbanism as their points to win over voters, and they see how important this is. But they needed this uprising. But from my podcast guests, it is still very much like a niche thought. Like in universities, it hasn't changed a lot, and I think that is my benchmark for like how hopeful we should be, because even if there is a big shift in how people want to build, then who is going to train all these people to really use the vernacular technologies, to teach the classical orders? Like they're not being taught. You have to go to Notre Dame University or some other programs which are being started right now in the United States, or you have to go to a summer school.
But you have done something with this, isn't that right?
Yes, yeah. So that's true. We actually, with a group from INTBouw, the Netherlands, which is INTBouw is the international group that is, I think, supported by the Prince Foundation and the international network of traditional builders, architects, and urbanists. And with the Dutch group of that, we came together at an excursion in a Belgian town, Heulebrug, I believe, which, there was just an excursion there. We were looking at this town, which was designed by Douani and his company. And there was this idea for a summer school. And, funny enough, there were, during that excursion, some people we came together and we had this plan, like, hey, we could make such a thing work. And we had some meetings and we saw, like, is this a thing we could do? And at some point we said, like, yeah, we're going to try it. We're just going to organize the summer school. So in last year, we actually had the first edition of this summer school called Let's Build a Beautiful City, which was held in Utrecht, a beautiful Dutch town. And we invited a lot of international high-profile architects and urban designers, more in the traditional field, of course. So it was a big success. We had 22 students, and we had enough sponsors to finance everything. We had a beautiful location in the city center in the university, and it was just a lot of excursions drawing in the street, making measured drawings, a lot of just, we visited a lot of places. There was a lot of course, theory, and a great group that came together really nicely. And that was very hopeful because we got a lot of response for people who wanted to join this summer school. And that is, I think that is, for now, it's necessary to have such a school because there's nothing in universities. And I think there's a lot of students who are actually kind of undercover in universities. They would like to draw classical or traditional, but they very early learn that it is not possible. And I think they kind of go off the path, or if they are on the path, then they will revert to it later after the study. But this summer school actually just is like, it's also like, it's just a way to blow off their creative steam for some of these students. We had a Dutch student who was from a Dutch university, and he was finally able to do what he wanted, you know. So I think that's a very effective way. And there's actually more summer schools this next year coming, and we're organizing it again. So we hope we will make it work, so we can actually hold it again. And there's also one in Belgium, organized by La Table Ronde. And there's one, I think, in Great Britain, which has already which is already open for people to join. So, but yeah, it's a necessity, but it's also great to organize because there I met, of course, Robert Adam and Nicholas Boy Smith and some other great thinkers and designers.
And so, what kind of people did sign up for the summer school? Was it architects or students or?
Very diverse, very diverse. So we had people from the United States. We had one from Trinidad or somewhere in the Caribbean. We had people from Israel. We had just a Chinese student who studied actually in Italy. So very diverse. Some were architects, some were even doing even like a classical program in architecture. Some were just students, some were just interested. We had young to old, all walks of life. So it was really great to see this super diverse group of people come together, and they were very friendly with each other, and it was a great atmosphere. So it was very diverse.
Related back to what we talked about earlier in how to change this collective view, there is something about how the valuation of something grows when the knowledge about it grows. You can see that with music, with the people that play an instrument. It's close to impossible not to get to value the music that you play, because you know the hard work that is behind it. You manage to see the nuances, and that's why the summer schools like Let's Build a Beautiful City and the Aesthetic City podcast is so important.
Absolutely. It's really, once you take the first steps to studying something, you kind of discover it's a rabbit hole so deep you could go on forever. There's so much to study, there's so much to read. And when you start drawing it, then you really discover all these roadblocks like, oh wow, wait a minute, how did they do that, you know? So then you come in a new territory where you really see the kind of the skill these designers had. And then you also realize, oh wow, there's so much more to study. And then you have one book, and then you see like, oh wait, but that book is also interesting. And then before you know it, you have like your whole wall covered with books about new subjects, and you could go on forever collecting books, because there is just like how many thousands of years of built tradition there is, which is now being disregarded by only focusing on the tradition, which only goes until, well, like let's say the 1920s, and then other architects that say they take from the other, they take from the older traditions, but it's just like maybe like a little inspiration, but actually it doesn't look like it at all. They don't use those technologies or those techniques. So it's such a rich history you can take from. There's so much you can. You can basically you just specialize all your life in like one local style and never know all there is to know. And that is all not being done right now. Well, there are some architects doing it, but it's not even close to the number that could study this full time, work on this full time, and make use of that knowledge.
And you say that is not being done now by architects or by urban designers.
Partly,
it's
measurable.
That's so what would you say is wrong with the profession today of urban designers or architects?
Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, I think they want to be very academic, but which of course, I mean, that's noble because they want to make it a science out of it. They want to have this academic prestige, you could say, which I understand, of course, because they're intelligent, they're in a university often, and then that's the academic world like. You should write papers, but it also feels kind of forced because I don't know if everything needs to be such a topic to write papers about. Sometimes you just need to drill something very practically to get to a very nice end result. And that is what I miss a bit in the profession, like the contact with the people, the evidence-basedness. Like it's based on studies and very kind of top-down studying it. But is there what happens when you start asking people what kind of urban fabric they would like large-scale polling, for example, and large-scale studies with people and their preferences also for architecture styles. If you would do such a thing, they would get such interesting results. But I think, there are reasons that doesn't happen. So that is one thing. So this academic soup, I call it, like it's very confusing as well. When I studied there, kind of everything was possible in a way. There were not really like guidelines you could use or things or standards. Everything was open for study, which is also good, of course, like to not hammer everything down, but it also felt like directionless. And they have like kind of, feels like they have let it go and everything goes. Like if you have a good concept and you can sell it, that's again that part, then, well, if you can sell it, why not? You know, it's good. You can sell your concept, so the people buying it will do it. But then, that translates just in horrible plans sometimes. And happily, there are some design firms that are doing the right things and they see the right things. But still, there's so many mistakes being made. Looking at the central station area of Utrecht Centraal, for example, they're building this whole park of like huge towers. And the only reason, there's some reasons, like one is like, we need to have a modern city. We need to go with the time. And two is, we have a big lack of housing, so we need to go into the air. There's no other choice. But just the places they're creating they look nice in renders, but I have very strong doubts if it is actually nice in real life. And the parts that are now built and are now done, they're just not nice. They're not as pleasant. They have nothing to do with Utrecht. And this also happens in Leiden at the moment. They're building stuff right now. It's also happening in Amsterdam across the water, where they're building all these towers, which have nothing to do with Amsterdam. So they have this opportunity to use the rich context that Amsterdam offers, this rich history with all its forms and all its techniques and all its inspiration and art, which they could put into these towers. But then they just go for something that you could find anywhere on the planet, in Singapore or in Frankfurt or wherever. So there is this extreme blindness to local to local context as well. And respect for local places, for local histories, for what people want in a certain place. So there is just a lot of blindness for things that really actually matter to a lot of people. And that can actually also hurt the city a lot. So that is one thing. And I don't see a lot of movement in a direction that has more respect for these cities, especially in big cities. Because in smaller towns where they have like a little building project where they build some houses, in the Netherlands at least, they actually often build more like traditional homes because they know, the developers know this is what people want. And they listen to the people, and then they build this nice red brick, typical Dutch home, or this 30s home, which is very popular in the Netherlands. So they listen to the people there. But then in big cities, they build stuff, and I barely see polls about like would you want to get built. Or they have a poll with only 4 modern options, like the new library in Rotterdam. They have 4 modern options. There's not a single one that says something else. I think that is also a way of gatekeeping. But that's just my opinion about it, of course.
What is interesting about your or uplifting about your critique is that you're presenting real alternatives. That you're saying in what I heard is that you're saying that they are like, this is bad what they are doing, and they're not respecting the local building traditions and what people want. Yeah. And that's like 2 very concrete ways to do things differently.
Yeah. Exactly. And one more thing I would like to add is that I do believe that these people act in good faith. I absolutely believe that they're acting in good faith. That's very important. But I do believe, and that is my critique point, is that and that's just a shame in my opinion. It's just very sad that they're just blind to the missing puzzle piece, the thing that could actually make building projects popular, that could make areas more thriving, that could make developments more easily and easy to do, easy to develop, that could make places more thriving, that could increase the tax base, that could increase health for the inhabitants and wealth for the city. And that is just using these principles that we now start to know that really work, like in places here and also in Poundbury actually. Just using the local context and using these principles of traditional architecture and urbanism. So it's a bit of a shame. It's a bit sad that they circle around the right answer, which is obvious once you have studied it and say like, look, it's there. You can use it. It's free to use. Nobody is going to shoot you if you pick up this book and look inside and see like how to design these cities, or you study these principles of proportion and. But that's the thing that comes, I think, from academia and from also this idea that everything has to be progressive in a way. And then my question is progress towards what, of course, but that it has to look futuristic, that it has to look like it's progressive, even though they don't really define what the progress is towards. And it's also very shallow and like cosmetic. Like it's so shallow. Like it looks futuristic, but does that mean that it is automatically better for the people there?
It's interesting to call it shallow and cosmetic, because that's much of the critique that often comes to new classical architecture, and but then it's so often with critique you can turn it upside down, and that can be even more the case.
Yeah, for architecture, I do understand why they would say that about new traditional architecture, because it's often only a skin in a lot of cases, not always. And in modern architecture, often you have very interesting interiors with interesting structures. But that also makes that these buildings with interesting structures are very suitable for only one goal. And sometimes these structures are even structural, so you can't change them. So that also makes them less adaptable and therefore less reusable and therefore more prone to getting rid of in the future and replaced by another building. So yeah, there's two sides to the coin. So and also if a building is, if you can just change the shell around it, you can also do it in the future if you decide that your taste has changed a lot. But yeah, so you're true about that whole statement. It is indeed true that you can just flip the criticism around.
Yeah, but not necessarily. I don't think that that's a right criticism of the classical architecture, because that's easy to say about. You can say less good classical architecture.
Yeah. Yes.
That of course sometimes an ornament can be put on in a non-fitting place, and
yes.
then it's more cosmetic. But that doesn't say that ornamentation in itself is bad.
Yeah.
Because there are bad examples of it.
Exactly.
There are. It is a concept, and it is something. It is a concept because it has worked, and because it is something that is valued.
Exactly, and you also touch on the correct use of ornaments, also the correct use of. That's actually important also for traditional and classical architecture. That's also what makes it sometimes less popular now, is that it's often just botched. It's not done in the right way, and then you have things that look horrible because not the right proportion systems are used. Yeah. But that's part of the illiteracy that is now in architecture.
Yeah. I remember I participated in a course in classical architecture at the Institute for Classical Architecture and Art, and there the first class was about that, about using classical architecture correctly, and that. To many people, especially in today's society, that sounds so square. It's like, oh, it has to be correct. Why? We live in a free world. But it's not correct in the sense of follow the rules. It's more like this works and this doesn't. Yeah. And then we were shown pictures of columns that were in the right proportions, and then some columns that were not in the right proportions at all, that were put on some private houses just because the owner thought like, well, I want some columns, and then put on some columns, and it looked terrible. And that just shows that it's
absolutely,
it's so important with the literacy within the field.
And there is a reason for that, and of course there's multiple proportion systems that work well, because you have the Ionic order, you have the Doric order, and then you have the difference between the Roman and the Greek Doric order, for example. But the importance comes, I think, from nature, because I think those orders are based on natural forms, the wooden column, but because if you see, let's say you see a massive tree with a huge canopy, but it has like a trunk that's this thin and it supports all that weight, you see it's not right. Like laws of physics, it defies the laws of physics. So you think like that's not stable and it doesn't look good. And of course it couldn't be because trees don't grow with like this thin of a stem unless a new species evolves with a titanium trunk or something. But everything in nature is there for a reason. It has to follow the rules of gravity, and that same sensitivity has come into classical architecture, I believe, with these proportions, so that it looks natural, it looks right, it looks like the laws of physics apply there.
And that's partly what your podcast, The Aesthetic City, is doing something about to increase the level of literacy.
I hope to have these conversations with architects to let them have their conversations and to kind of bring their work in in a very just easily to understand format, because there's a big part of educative part in there, which is important. But then you also I will also try to make more videos, because I think that is, a lot of people are very visually stimulated, and I think YouTube is an excellent place to learn, and I think that is the next step to synthesize all this knowledge and bring it in a video format to a wider audience. But of course that takes time. But I have seen that people react really well to the short videos I made from some snippets of the podcast, because it is also the way in how do you bring such knowledge to a wider audience. And that is really also important, like the marketing aspect of it. It's if we want to make a nicer environment, you have all the theory, that's great. You have all the practice, that's great. But how are people going to know about it? I mean, how many people know of the existence of Cayala? And also, you kind of sometimes need boots on the ground to take pictures and film of places that are like it, and report on them and show what happens there. So that's also what I did in Poundbury and here, for example. And also, of course, the places where I feel it doesn't work, and to then exactly show the things that don't work. In Rotterdam, for example.
So in short, what's your vision for what the aesthetic city should achieve?
It's a good question. Well, of course, my ultimate aim is to help achieve. So not achieve myself, because it will never be only the aesthetic city, but to help achieve a wider paradigm shift in how we look at cities and how we look at architecture. So going from very, kind of fashion sensitive and, in my opinion, superficial solutions to deeper, more respectful and solutions that are, more healthy and wealthy, wealth creating, and with more well-being for everyone. And doing that by disseminating all this information in a very easily to reach manner.
And on that note, Ruben Hanssen, it was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for coming to the Cave of Apelles.
Thanks so much, it was my pleasure.
And thank you for watching. And remember to head over to caveofapelles.com/subscribe and become a member today. We will see you next month.